So it's time to learn Lakuti Maran over here. We're still over here. We're going into some of these Pirushim to give us an idea of the background that the Rebbe is talking about. So we've been looking at this, and we're coming to the end of this. This particular place where it says like this: Rise, sing out in the night. Song is raised up by means of the night. What is the night? It's a metaphor for the 6 orders of the Talmud. What could he mean here? So, first of all, we have seen many places in the Zohar, if we're taking the time to really look at the Zohar and get into it. It says that the main time, the best time for learning Torah is after midnight. So let's see what we say over here. Scripture speaks of rising at night to study Torah, as a result of which the Shekhinah, the divine presence, resides with that person. The Kabbalists teach that this refers especially to rising for chutzos for midnight. This is a big thing in Breslev, is to wake up in the middle of the night, to break your sleep, and to get into the Shekhinah at that time. It is a beautiful, beautiful time if you could do it. It's not so easy because in the old days, in 1800 or 1810, when Rebbe Nachman was dictating this to Rebbe Nelson, his Talmud Mokha, they didn't have lights like we have. They didn't have electricity. They had candles. So nighttime was really nighttime. People went to bed as soon as it got dark. Then you could wake up in the middle of the night. There's a name, the Jewish name called Becker, if you know anybody named Becker. So I was heard from Rabbi Wein, Rabbi Beryl Wein, that Becker is actually the word Wecker, which means to wake up, to wake people up. That in Shtetlich across Poland and Eastern Europe, that they would wake people up to go to the shul at midnight. And they have some places like that here now, believe it or not, where people come together to learn Torah specifically at that time. The Me'anachol, which is a Pirush on the Likutei Moharan, adds that these words from Lamentations were spoken by Yirmiyahu, that's Jeremiah, at the time of the Hot Temple's destruction. Jewelry's darkest hour. This shows that even when Malchus of the other side, that is, when wicked singers, people sing the songs of hate, of lust, prevails, a person can elevate evil, that is profane song, you can elevate it, that even evil can be elevated. How? By studying the Talmud. This is part of what the Rebbe is saying, is that in the darkest of times, the learning of the Talmud, which he says that the Iker would be the learning the Mishnayos. This is because studying the oral law gives strength to the Malchus of holiness. Now, we have the concept here of a song, night, the Talmud. He renders the verse as referring to waking up to study Mishnah. Now, in our context, therefore, the verse reads, rise, sing out, raise, and elevate song in the night. By studying Talmud, which is an aspect of night, that's how you elevate it. You elevate the night by putting a dedusha into the darkness. Now, he says not in other places, not the first part of the night, but after midnight. See, also the Gemara Megillah, he says where the sages criticize those who study without song. That's a different thing. Tosfos comments that it was customary when studying oral law to recite the words with a melody. This ties in with our lesson in that Rebbe Nachman teaches that Talmud study rectifies song. The Zohar also points to the connection between the two, quoting Song of Songs, which says the time for singing has arrived, and the voice of the turtle dove. This is the oral Torah, is heard in the land. So this is a basic idea of Rebbe Nachman. He says that learning Torah, the oral Torah at nighttime, is a rectification for mistakes that we make with our mouths. How important it is. Let's go over here. So we got another place we got to go to over here. And they said, however, when a person studies, not for learning's sake only, but in order to be called rabbi, such study is not all that meritorious. Yet, if he studies at night, the thread of loving kindness is drawn over him during the day, and it protects him from being adversely affected by this intention. Now, there's a lot to be said here. He has a lot over here, and there's a lot of drushos on this. Let's start out, and let's see what we can understand and we can learn. He says, studies not for learning's own sake. So what is learning's own sake? This is like wanting to cling to God. In Hebrew, its own sake is called lishma, for its name's sake. Not for its own sake is called shalol lishma. The Parvat of Chachma writes, there are three general categories for the things we do in the service of God. These are the things that are obligatory and the mitzvah. There are those things that are permissible, concerning which we are free to choose. And finally, there are things that are prohibited. So there's the mitzvahs, there's choices, and there are things we shouldn't do. Now, what did he mean? These three categories are also applicable to the study of Torah. Studying solely for the sake of fulfilling the precepts of the Torah is obligatory, and it's a mitzvah, the ultimate perfection of holiness. Studying Torah so as to be able to argue with and irritate other scholars with no intent of following the Torah's guidance or performing its commandments. In other words, you just want to upset the apple cart, so to speak. People are talking and you want to insert yourself. This falls into the category of prohibited acts. The only true, the total impure klipa. Concerning such study, the Talmud states it would have been better that he had never been born. It's a Gemara. When one studies Torah with the intent of performing and fulfilling the commandments, is also in mind some personal benefit, like, say, if you learn, you could make a lot of money, or to be called rabbi, because he falls into the middle category. His study is shalol lishma. His study is not with the proper intent, which has two sides to it. Sometimes this type of study generates into the totally impure sort of learning, hence the Talmudic dictum, when someone studies shalol lishma, he would be better off had he never been born. So we saw that previously. So he says other times it rises to the level of selflessness and perfection. That is lishma. You're doing it because you want to be near to him. Hence the Talmudic dictum, it is beneficial to study even shalol lishma, because from shalol lishma, in other words, doing it for selfish reasons, one can come to lishma. It is this last category and the danger of studying shalol lishma that the Rebbe next turns. A little bit there. Now, here he says over here, there's one more here. Let's try to get this in. To be called rabbi, Rebbe Nachman has taught that studying oral law at night, both which corresponds to Malchus. Now he says like this, the oral law is the Malchus part. It's the explanation or the detailing or the categorization of the law, which corresponds to Malchus, and night also corresponds to Malchus. Rectifies speech and consequently the voice. This enables a person to rectify song not when a person studies Torah lishma. Now, when a person studies Torah lishma, he strengthens the Malchus of holiness, for his entire being is devoted to serving God. In other words, studying oral law, lishma becomes Malchus to God. It returns Malchus to God. Now, this is an idea I have to explain a little bit. Studying Torah law is the law that comes from the bottom, from the details of all the different kinds of problems that we find in the world and straightening them out. That is the place of Malchus. And what happens when you do this, you elevate it, and I think this is a pirush of Rebbe Chaim Kramer. He says, returns Malchus to God. It causes a reverse effect. The Malchus rises. But if a person studies to acquire fame or wealth or to impress somebody, he forces Malchus to submit to his authority, and thereby strengthen the Malchus of the other side, the Malchus of selfishness. Studying the law or law with such intentions cannot possibly rectify Malchus. It's going the wrong direction. Now he had written on this number 25 at the top, he says that it's not all that meritorious, and let's see what he wants to say. Not all that meritorious. A person whose Torah study is truly lishma is a rarity. It is perhaps equally rare that someone studies Torah solely for contentious purposes. So most people, he wants to say, are in between. In contrast, there are many who would like to study Torah, lishma, free of ulterior motives, but have yet to achieve their goal. So they fulfill God's commandments to study Torah, all the while anticipating some personal gain, this being shalom lishma. So people will think you're a Talmud Chacham, you're a special person, you're a good boy, you're a good student, da-da-da-da. The Talmud recommends that these people study anyway. Because if you're learning, for ultimately they will attain the level of Shema they strive for. Because you get involved with the Torah, and you really get involved in it, it has, that blessing comes back. There is therefore merit to such study, although, as explained, it also carries an inherent danger. For even though their ultimate goal is a worthy one, the Malchus they empower through seeking personal gain can cause them to give in completely to the second side of this shlo b'shma, studying solely for fame and wealth, etc., and wind up being successful at that. And while even this is not totally devoid of value because the person's still learning, but it's still possible to direct their intentions to attaining the level of lishma, but it becomes very, very, and it's still possible. He said, wants to say, it's still possible. But the problem is that there's a risk. The risk exists that by studying Shalom Lishma for gain, they will succumb to the truly reprehensible study, whose motivation is one-upmanship and argumentation. This is because the mocha, the mentality which one studies when one's desire is to gain fame, contain the seeds of the mochin. Now let's go over this again. He says the risk exists, so we said that. They will succumb to the truly reprehensible. Said that. This is because the mochin. Now, what are the mochin? The mochin, he calls it, that moach is lashon, is a language of brain power. So that flow, he says, which one studies when one's desire is to gain fame, contain the seeds of the mochin with which one studies to harass and harangue other scholars. And if you've been around learning before, you'll find people who really don't get into the inside of it. Instead, they argue with your points. Whatever you say, they say it's wrong. And they say, this and that. They just keep arguing back and forth. It doesn't go anywhere. These are latter mentalities are the mochin of the two birds of the other side. Mochin with a proclivity for arrogance and haughtiness. Whetting one's appetite for fame thus makes one susceptible to becoming arrogant and haughty. The trap of the two birds, those are the birds of the other side, the birds that chirp their own fame. Rebbe Nachman therefore concludes that studying Torah in order to be called rabbi cannot be considered all that meritorious. This is Baruch Fleischman, and that's the shir here. I think today is the second day of Sivan.